studio, and we're super lucky to have a couple engineering leaders from our Eng Leaders community, which is, for those of you who don't know, we have over 500 members. It's way less active than our core candidate community, but that's because these people are very, very busy. And so we are very lucky to have their time and energy and thoughtfulness today. So I think it would be great, Erica and then Chris, if you each want to just give us a little bit of background. I think your story into engineering is great, but also it can be good to quantify stuff. What size teams have you been working with? What are some aspects of scale to the things you've worked on, just to set the context, and then we'll jump into some questions. Erica, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So, hi everyone. My name is Erica. I currently serve as head of engineering at Scroobius, where we are building a platform to connect early stage founders, angel investors, and ecosystem partners, really with a mission to diversify the startup landscape. So as far as my background goes, I'm at this point, I'm a 3-time head of engineering for early stage startups in the Boston area. So my history has been in leading the technical execution behind some really awesome CEOs who all happen to be women, tackling really critical social issues. And I guess on top of that, I'm a career shifter. I'm a boot camp grad, and probably generally considered non-traditional in the tech space. So, as far as like team building goes, like I've helped to build teams in a variety of capacities. So, that means basically like formally as a hiring manager and department head, or informally because I've generally, most of my career in the tech space at least, has been at early stage startups, and startups tend to not say no, like, to people who want to raise their hands and pitch in on things. So I've informally had a role in building teams, and then extracurricularly, in the broader community through things like mentorship and professional service. So as far as quantifying things go, when I say early stage startups, I mean very early stage startups. So we're talking about company sizes of like 2 to like, let's say like 80, 100. So like we're talking like Series A and earlier as far as startups go. Yeah, I'll drop it there, and we can excited to be here, excited to chat with folks and dig into things.
For myself, I came a bit more of a traditional way in that I did computing science. I've worked as a software engineer. I've run a small company of my own quite early on, but then the crash of 2008 took that out to put some dates around it. I've moved through infrastructure engineering as an IC, as a manager, kind of growing up as I've moved between different organizations. I've Just like Erica was saying, I love bringing people together in workplaces, but also in extracurricular environments. So bringing people together to run conferences, host meetups, all sorts of things. Right now, I'm working on a community of executives actually to come together, kind of just like share patterns and practices and support each other, which is really fulfilling and excellent. But in terms of teams that I've led for work or engineering teams, I've been employee number 17. And I've grown, been part of like large 175-year-old organizations. Mostly I've managed teams that were
I'm gonna mute someone. I'm gonna mute. There we go. Keep going, please.
No problem. Mostly I've led teams between like 3 people and 45, and brought people together cross-functionally as well to form like working groups between different functions to be able to accomplish some sort of business goal. So this is the sort of thing that I've typically done.
Amazing. Before I get into my questions, there's some weird notification in the chat, so I'm just going to hit testing. Can somebody else try and tell us? It says, due to the large number of participants in this meeting, system messages for those who joined or left have been disabled. Can people just try to write something and see if it works?
Yeah, I think that's just when, so-and-so joined as a guest is not going to pop up anymore, which is honestly a blessing.
I see. Okay, cool. Okay, perfect. Thank you both so much for those intros. That was great. and I'm excited to get into it. Okay, so I have, a question for each of you, and then we're going to get into our 2 questions that I sent you before, which is advice to be successful in interviewing and engineering in general, and then we're going to do a hot take, and then we're going to get into questions. So everybody just, if you have a question as we go, write it down. It is also fun if you ask your question live on video with your face, but you don't have to just yet. So, okay. First, my first question was, for Erica, as you mentioned, you've worked with tons of early stage startups. What do you feel like the key trends are regarding what those employers are looking for when they make new hires? And like, if somebody was interested in an early stage startup, how would you recommend they kind of position themselves to stand out?
Yeah. So, I think it was, you had shared with this question with me beforehand, and I was like, oh, trends, oh no. Mostly because like the main thing that I've been seeing, so I guess a little bit of context. So the company that I work at, we work with a lot of really, really early stage startups. And so we get this real bird's eye view into kind of the startup ecosystem and how founders are building their businesses. And so if anything, the main thing that I've seen is that every startup is just wildly different. So, what they're, and then that trickles down into the hiring, right? So what they're looking for, just depends on what they're building. It depends on the, the skill sets and the cultural or historical quirks sometimes of the existing team. It is all over the place. But, as far as being able to, productively engage in conversations, if you're interested in diving into early stage startups, I don't think anything of what I'm going to say is like new or revolutionary or anything, but I think some of the common threads that I tend to see are, they want to see people who like can get things done, that demonstrate initiative. They want to see communication and collaboration skills because, your technical skills are table stakes, but if you can't collaborate with a small team, then it's going to get really tough really quickly. And then I think another piece in engaging with startups and interviews is, having that genuine interest in the team and what they're building. Because being curious and asking questions in that interview process can just go a really, really long way with startups. And then I think one thing that goes along with that piece is, really understanding who you're talking with and making sure that you're tailoring conversations accordingly. Because one thing that's really, really common in an early stage startup is that you're going to interview with a number of people in other functions. Like you're not just going to be talking with engineers the entire stretch of your interview. Like, and it's not going to be just one cross-functional conversation. Your entire interview stream might be with folks who are non-technical or non-engineers. And so, the last thing you want to do in those conversations is lead the conversation into technical minutia if you're meeting with someone who just doesn't have context or interest in that topic. And so really understanding who the person you're talking with is, I think something that differentiates the startup interviews versus interviews at larger tech companies.
I love how you're like, oh, I don't know if I can share a good, and then you had like really nuanced takes. Like, I didn't think any of that was too generic. I think those were all really practical and actionable for our community. I had one follow-up question, just like would love your thoughts on, and then we'll move over to Chris. Okay, a lot of people in Leopard reject companies because they think they're too early stage. So when you said each early stage company is different, that's something similar to what I say, which is like, no company is, or, don't put all early stage companies in the same bucket. Everything is super different. Do you have any advice for some of those folks who might be nervous to join an early stage company? Feel free to do anti-sell if you're like, don't go unless you're sure, or if you think people should take a chance. Either of those could be useful.
Yeah, I don't think so. Like, I think I love this question because, you're right. Early stage startups are like, not all early stage startups are created equal. There are some really there are all flavors, and it depends on what you're looking for and what you have an appetite for. So like, for example, like I would say that if you're going into an early stage startup, like you have to go in and you have to go in like trying to get as much information as you can about the team, and you have to understand what you're looking for and what you want to see out of that experience, because not every early stage startup is a burnout machine. Not every early stage startup is toxic. But the thing that, but it is on you to do that due diligence with the company. And when you go into these interviews, it's not that you don't have to be aggressive, but you do have to take a lot of initiative in the interview process to do the sussing out for yourself. And that means for yourself, really understanding what you need to see out of this team. Because there will be periods of our lives, of our careers, where we're like, yeah, no, not that you want to burn out, but like, no, this is my time to really like, go dive deep in. Like, I'm kind of okay with like, a heavier workload. And there are going to be periods of our time, of our lives where that's not compatible with what we're looking for. And that's totally okay. And you will find these at different startups. But again, it's really getting to understand like the people on the team, the culture of the team. And so asking questions, and a lot of questions in the interview process, is really, I think, key to understanding that, because I've been very, very fortunate to work at early stage startups that, we have our busy periods, but I've been very lucky to be at startups that are also respectful of boundaries. But that's part of the kind of diligence process for you as part of that interview process.
Love it. Lots, I'm sure, more we can get into in the questions. If anybody thinks of anything, obviously drop it in the chat. We'll get to it after. But okay, Chris, my question for you was, and we're gonna, even though we're not gonna pay attention to the chat, we're gonna come back to the chat after, but throw stuff in the chat. Okay, Chris, like I know you have so much to say about like mentoring and like building inclusive teams. And so you might be like, annoyed by my question, but I've actually been looking for somebody to answer this, which is just that you've been working on developer tools for the last few years. And I know you were at Segment before this, and you've been doing a lot of B2B SaaS in general, but I am always looking for leaders to share where the trends are in terms of developer tools. What does this mean for software engineers? I mean, obviously you don't have to speak on behalf of everything in software engineering, but are there any Erica's like, no trends, any insights that you can share with our community just based on where tooling is going for software engineers and what that could mean from a career progression standpoint?
Sure, yeah. I think the thing everybody's expecting me to talk about when it comes to tooling is AI. And I'm going to talk about it, but I want to put it in a bit of context before I jump into that. First of all, my experience that you're referring to, I worked at Segment. I was the Vancouver site lead. I'm in Vancouver, Canada, by the way. We opened the office here, and I was the person who was supposed to handle that. But also, I was leading what they called the sources team, and the sources team was responsible for reaching out to third-party APIs, connecting it, grabbing a whole bunch of data on behalf of a customer, and then sending it someplace. It was basically ETL with like random third-party APIs, which you get to learn a lot about the fact that many APIs do not do what they say on the box, and that the companies do not necessarily support you through connecting to be able to pull the data out. That was kind of sometimes it's almost adversarial. We tried not to be actually adversarially pulling data out, but that was the thing. And then at Shortcut, we have it's a project management and collaboration system. So it's compared to Jira, Linear, companies like that. What we're seeing right now is like I go back to the idea of like what it is that the software engineering job is. And I think right now there's a trend towards calling the people who are in our roles like less often calling them software engineers and more calling them builders or product development engineers or things like this. And I think I actually really like this because it emphasizes something that Erica was talking about, that you're going to be collaborating with people across the organization, especially in startup companies, but not everywhere is going to be exactly the same, right? Like you're going to be working with people across boundaries in order to get something done for the business. You are coming together in order to do some shared goal. And the really exciting thing about software engineering tooling is there's two ways it's going to help you. It's going to help you automate away toil or boring things that you don't need a human brain to be able to deal with. An example that most of you have already touched here is going to be build tooling, continuous integration tooling, monitoring, stuff like that. That is something you don't want to have to actually spend time on if you can avoid it. You want to be able to commit, push up your PR, and have a system deal with it, right? That kind of work is kind of type A. The type B is going to be helping you notice and integrate with other people around you to get something done together. And those are the kind of the sort of trends that I would see. There's a lot of people right now who are trying to say our AI is going to eliminate entire classes of job. And I don't think that's true. And the reason I don't think it's true is because, first of all, the software is just not that good. If you've ever used some of the systems, it's just not replacing a human, and that's okay. The second reason is there's a reason that companies do not employ a single software engineer in any particular level. It's because they want to go faster. They don't want to just like have just the bare minimum of people to cover the skill sets they need. They want to be able to move faster. So even when there is AI, they're going to want to just have people who can take these tools and use them to get the shared goals done faster, better, and yes, cheaper. But when you think about cheaper, it's a question of efficiency. It's not a question of like we actually just want to spend $10 a month on our software development effort. So I think that the trends that what we're looking for here are people are going to need to think about what it is that the shared goal looks like, what is the organization doing, and how am I going to be able to use the technologies that I have available to spend less time on things that do not require my attention, or to be able to connect with other people and work more effectively and efficiently to be able to do things that do require human creativity and collaboration and interaction between functions. Those are the kind of things that I would be really excited in seeing because you're going to want to have organizations are going to want to go faster, and the limitation on being able to go faster will be less and less the software engineers and more the things that help and empower software engineering functions to move more quickly. So the bottleneck is just going to move, and that's where I would be looking at targeting.
So just so I follow, you said the two groups. There's like the creative collaborators, and what was the first group? And would you recommend folks be the second group?
I'm saying there's two different kinds of tools that we're going to see as general
I
sorts of
see. I
trends. One
see
of them is
that.
going to be things that are toil that like nobody really wants to do this. It's just something that you have to spend time doing.
I see. I see.
There's going to be tools that are already existing that your organization will be able to leverage that they just hasn't got to yet. And there's also going to
Yep.
be new tools coming in that kind of
Okay.
allow us to do more things that are toil that are automatable than could be done previously. I noticed you turned on AI transcription and the AI meeting annotation system here. That's kind of toil. Nobody really loves taking meeting minutes. Um, and
Totally.
and
Toil.
it exactly it's
TOIL.
toil. TOIL. Yeah.
Perfect.
Um,
Yeah, thank
it's that kind of stuff where it's like you got to mop, someone's got to mop the floor. And it's great when we can have technology do it for us. The other
totally.
class is going to be the kind of thing where it's helping us understand more about what's happening across the entire company and helping
Yes.
us be able to communicate and collaborate more effectively with people who do not have the exact same job as us. So, for example, there might be an AI system that helps you understand um, more about what the business is doing so that while you're working on your system, you can actually understand, like, oh, I see how this fits into the bigger scheme of things because I hope it helps me link this particular thing I'm working on into the objectives as explained. Or it might be something that just helps you navigate, the code bases of a larger organization that you're not familiar with. If some team in another time zone has built this system and you actually now need to integrate with it, let's say it's an API for a third party company, and you don't actually have access to those people 24/7, it might be really useful to be able to have systems that help you understand what that stuff looks like, why the decisions were made, what trade-offs were explicitly decided upon, what the limitations really look like, et cetera. And there are systems that are being built that will help that sort of thing.
Love it. I'm gonna let everybody take like 5 to 10 seconds, absorb that, and then think of your questions on anything related to not just AI, but also anything related to developer tools, anything related to how some of these trends that I think Chris said so beautifully might impact your own career development or progression or what to focus on. So pausing, getting those questions in, and then I have two more questions for our leaders, and then we're going to switch over. I just don't want to start yapping until people got a chance because there was some really good stuff on that. Gonna meditate. We can meditate. Okay. You all can think. I had some as well. So, okay. What is one piece of advice each of you would give this group to help succeed, whether it's in interviews or advancing their engineering career? I like saying unintuitive, things that are maybe not obvious, but I feel like both of you are going to go that way anyway. So one piece of advice from each would be great.
Chris, you want to kick us off on this one?
I was hoping you would, but I'm willing to if you want a bit of extra time, but I need to hear you say it.
You take it. You should take it. You should
Okay,
take
all right, I'm on it. The
it.
piece of advice that I would have is from the very first time that you are interacting with a company that you want to work at, um, you you should be thinking about what the company is trying to accomplish. And that's going to guide. I see a couple questions about understanding about culture, um, and that's going to guide a lot of the thinking you do about whether or not you're a fit for the company, whether or not you actually like what they're doing. And also, it's going to guide everything about your career with them if you were to be hired. And a big part of this that you it might sound really obvious, but I want to really emphasize it is knowing where you're at, understanding like what are the things that you are currently good at, what are the things that you want to be better at, what are the things that you do not want to be better at, you're not interested in, right? Knowing that sort of thing will help you understand what kind of business problems you're going to be able to solve, what kind of impact do you think you can have at the company. You put those two things together, when you go into an interview, every conversation with the person that you're going to have will be along the lines of how are you will be able to ask them, how are you impacting the company? What is your mission? And how do I fit into your mission? And that's a very powerful conversation to be able to have. And it means that if you were to be hired, you'd be able to turn that into a short, medium, long-term plan that would be able to say like, okay, what's the impact that I'm going to have in the short term? How am I going to do that? Be able to talk with your manager if you have one, um, to be able to understand like, how am I going to integrate? What are the things I need to know about most? How am I going to demonstrate my value so that I can start to build the credibility that I need? Because you'll be thinking about like, what are we doing together? And what am I doing with my career as a separate kind of path that just happens to be following along this company for the time being? Um, it's a lot of thinking, but I think it's going to serve you very well, both in the interview process, because every good interviewer I've ever seen asks you something about like what is the impact you've had at your previous companies, what is the impact you're looking to have here, where are you taking your career? Those kinds of questions are about mission, really fundamentally in my mind. Um, so thinking about like where are you actually at? What does your trajectory look like? And it allows you to think about your mission and your journey, your practice, rather than saying, wow, I really want a job because I need to make rent, which is, let's face it, in the background of everybody doing a job search, right? But that's the kind of conversation that I think most hiring managers would really resonate with. Um, and it allows you to have those cross-functional conversations that Erica was talking about earlier. I can't, it's very interesting to have those conversations with people. It helps you understand what the culture looks like. If you are in a meeting with senior managers at the company and they cannot answer the question of what they're doing as a mission, you have your answers about whether or not that's going to be a great place to work. And I have absolutely met those people. I've sat next to those people on both sides of the table, and it tells you whether or not they're thinking like about what your impact is going to be and what your trajectory looks like. Um, so to summarize, thinking about like where you're at, what your path looks like, what your journey looks like, and then looking at those companies and saying like, what is it they're trying to accomplish? What does their next steps look like? And how do I fit in? That is, how do these things fit together well? If it doesn't fit together well, that's okay. It's absolutely okay to take a job just because you need to make rent, but realize that's what it is, and that you may not feel most fulfilled doing that in the long term.
Love it. Keep it going in the chat. You all were seeing stuff come through that everything is looking really great. I'll throw goofy ones in there just for fun. The last question, so we can end on a fun note from my side, and then honestly, we're going to spend the next 30 minutes on questions. So prepare yourselves. Hot take on software engineering can be about interviews, careers, the industry at large, anything you want. And Chris asked me earlier, really anything, but we're trying to keep it constructive over here so that we can hopefully like learn something and do something with it. But also it's a hot take, so say whatever you want.
Well, we missed Erica's take on hiring advice. So
Oh, I'm
Oh
fine to
my
maybe
go right.
we
God. So dumb. I'm so
maybe we need
spacey. Please, I completely take everything I just said back. Erica, you're up.
Well, I was ready to hop right into the hot takes, but I think
both at once.
I guess like as far as advice goes, I think the one thing that I share pretty often with my mentees is about just like approaching interviews and treating them as an improv conversation and information expedition. And for me, like approaching interviews in that way has done two things. I think one, reminding myself that it's an improv, not a monologue, helps me prevent like monologuing in an interview, because if you find yourself like, the last thing you want to do in an interview is start monologuing, because one, that's a great way for your interviewer to disengage from the conversation, and you've also it's also a lost opportunity for you, because you're just going to end up walking away without getting any value out of the interview, because you've done all the talking, you haven't gotten any information for yourself, so that you can go and make a good decision about whether or not this is an opportunity you want. So and then the second piece around information expedition is like, again, remembering like, yes, people tell you like, oh, it's not just the company interviewing you, it's you interviewing the company. But like, I really, really mean that. Like, I mean that kind of to the extreme, where when you're going into the interviews, like, you don't just want to be a passive participant, like reacting to questions. Like, you want to be an active participant in that interview, so that you can extract as much information as you can to make a good decision, because that's the goal of the interview. Your goal isn't to get everything right or show that you know everything about everything in the world. Like, your goal is to extract as much information as you can, so you can make a good decision about whether or not to either continue the conversation or ultimately like accept a job offer if that gets extended to you. Like, that's the goal. So that's, yeah.
Killer. So good. You want to jump right into your hot take?
Okay, so I don't know if y'all are gonna like this one, but for senior engineers, okay, so for senior engineers, I don't know that I don't know that it's always the best use of your time in preparing for interviews. Like, I don't know that that's always the best use of your time. There are cases where I think it can be a good use of time, but it's not always the best use of your time.
What is a better use of time? Wow, that's a good hot take for this community. Leopard
I
community
think
is
I
the
don't know, like
best.
I don't know how that'll land here. I don't.
No, let's go. That is actually, I know, look, you're getting some hearts. Wait, what's the alternative? What would you say folks should spend time on instead?
Yeah, so I think one thing that's real, so like, and again, like one assumption I'm making is that most folks in this room are probably senior plus engineers. And I think instead, like if I were to prioritize my time, first thing that I'm doing is reviewing my resume, refreshing my memory on past accomplishments and projects. And making sure that I can like have the muscle memory to talk about them. Because if you're senior, you probably got a number of years behind you, and you might be a little rusty about like talking about those experiences. And it's going to be way more meaningful and way more impressive to be able to talk very meaningfully about your experiences as an engineer than it is about like some rando thing you tried to like learn last minute in technical prep for an interview. And so that's one reason why I don't think it's always the best. Like there are always exceptions, but it's not always going to be the best use of your time, because let's face it, like if you're a little more senior in your career, like you've got priorities. Like some of us have responsibilities and kids or hobbies or like other things that we need to prioritize, or just other responsibilities. And so you want to be, your time is valuable, and you should treat it as such. Um so it's not always the best use. That's the first thing that I would jump into personally.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Chris,
First of all, I want to plus one what Erica just said. There's a lot of
totally.
companies that do like this is a hot take period, so I'm going to be a little bit blunt. Really stupid interviewing techniques. High pressure whiteboard interviews of very specific technical problems. Like, come on. Like in the AI era, there was we were talking about AI in the chat a little bit. In the AI era, that's dumb, right? I have literally been called up by somebody. And they said, "Hey, you applied for Big Co, and I'm here to do a technical assessment." I'm like, "Great, what position?" And they said, "I don't know." I said, "Well, I how can I answer your question?" It's like, "Well, what we're going to do is we're going to be working on some questions about binary trees. So, how would you go about, like, can you show me how you do this?" I'm like, "Well, as a senior developer, I should not be building a binary tree library. I'm sure that what I should be doing is going to the things that have actually been built and vetted, preferably a standard library. But like, hey, if you've got some custom ones, I can use that too. And using the thing that's already been through QA 16 million times, right? I mean, let's be real, right? Those are not the problems that you want anybody really focusing on, especially at the senior levels. Like if you're an intern, if there's somebody here who is like just finishing school, okay, like they want to show that you've learned something there. But like absolutely, technical things shouldn't be an issue in most cases. Let me tell you the two technical interview problems that I have found most productive. One of them was hey, so we're going to walk you through a development arc. And that is to say, here's the problem you're going to be solving. Do you have any questions? This is part of the test, by the way. Do you have any questions part is part of the test. And the next part is like, okay, here's two approaches to solving this problem. Which one do you pick and why? Both of those questions are really important, the why part especially. Then the next part is here is a pull request for one of the methods. Please review the pull request. And then do you have any conclusions about it? Do you have anything in general? So you walk through an entire kind of like arc of being able to choose things and not necessarily having to generate stuff, because you cannot do that in short time span. And the second thing was coming prepared to talk us through a project that you either built yourself or very, very, very well, being able to speak to the specific trade-offs and decisions that you made. And the way that people choose to talk about it is really, really interesting. The way that they say, like, whether they come with a PowerPoint deck or they just like open up a terminal and share their screen like this, or like what it is they do. Do they talk about what the business was doing at the time? Or are they just like, here is a piece of code that I wrote. This is how the code works, right? Like it just tells you about the way that the person thinks about things. And there is no way to fake it. You cannot fake your way through a presentation like that. When there's other senior engineers, they're saying, asking all the dumb questions, right? Like, wait, how does this work? Oh, what did you do that for? Or like, whatever. It's been super interesting and useful. Those are the questions that I like to answer. Now, here's the fun part. If you're in an interview where people are asking you dumb questions, like, here's the very technical thing. Ask them why. Ask them what they're hoping, what signal they're hoping to gain. Or just do it if you feel like you can. But like, if you're feeling like it's like, hey, I'm not going to show my best here, then you can reroute it to a different kind of thing. You can say like, what is the thing that you're trying to accomplish with this? I'm here to help you be able to do that, but I don't show my best coding in live in front of you like that. Happy to introduce you to my colleague ChatGPT if you really like. Anyway, my hot take is about never outsource your journey to someone else. You might have a really great manager. You might have me as a manager and I'm pretty great. Don't trust me. Don't give your manager your entire journey to be able to handle on their own. You need to understand where it is that you're going. You need to understand like what opportunities there are. You can work with a good manager to help you figure that stuff out, but it is your journey. And even the most well-intentioned person will not see things from your perspective. And it puts them in a conflict of interest because as a manager, my job is to be able to make sure that my team is achieving our shared mission. Remember I was talking about that earlier? And it is not to help you on your personal journey. Now, as somebody who gives a damn, I want our journeys to go as close as possible, as long as possible. And there's going to be a little bit times when it goes farther and closer. And maybe there'll be times when there's some forks in the road and we can try and say, like, let's steer in the thing that works better for both of us. But I'm in conflict of interest with you. Don't trust anybody to it. And that involves doing a bunch of things you've heard about from Erica and myself. It involves understanding where you're at. What's your level? Are you at the point where you're like an intern level where you're still learning how to learn things? Are you at an intermediate level where you know how to handle yourself, but you don't really know how to guide, how to steer? Like you don't have your own opinions about which way to go. Are you like, you know what? I'm actually really senior now, and I can look at what the business is doing and go, we need to, actually, I think there's a better way that we can be doing this. Right? What does your level look like? What are your goals? Are you looking to be able to bring people together? Are you looking to be able to like build deep architectures? Are you looking to be able to like churn things out really, really quickly so you can move really quickly? Understand how that links up to where the business is. Like, are you in an early stage startup where you're going to be throwing away 10 times as much code as you build? That doesn't make sense. 10 times as much code as you keep that that you've been building. Are you in a later stage company where you're actually going to be testing 10 times as much code as you actually push into production because you don't want to disrupt the goose that lays the golden egg? Figure out whether or not your needs match the stage of the business, match the stage of the team, match what's going on. Figure out where the gaps are and decide whether or not you personally want to fix it. If not, look to figure out what your next step is, even if that means moving to a different company. Even that means like you find out in the middle of your interview, this is not for me. If it means, you know what, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Here's the gap that I see between like in fit, and I'm not really sure how to bridge that gap. Maybe they'll surprise you. 9 out of 10 times they won't. 9 out of 10 times they'll say thanks for saving us the time, and you get to move on and do something else. And I would say yes, if they're starting to ask you stupid technical questions, that is one of the places where probably it's not the right fit for you.
Phenomenal. I just want to say before we get into the chat, how cool are our engineering leaders, right? Like, this is like the best panel. I mean, Chris, you literally decided to do this with like less than
Yesterday.
1 day notice, and like
That's cool.
you're pulling out like gold. And Erica, I feel like had to convince you a while back, but like I'm just like, this is so, so good. Okay. So, there's definitely some questions up above in the chat. If you both just wanna, there's questions directed at both of you. I can start pulling them out, or feel free to just call on, or just read off questions you're seeing. So I would say if you see one, start talking, and let's just keep throwing some more in the chat.
Terrific advice, Chris. Definitely be asking of the interviewers, like, why are you asking me? What are you hoping to get out of this? Can we talk about that and have a conversation? And if they can't have a conversation with you about that, are they even worth your time interviewing with them? Right. Absolutely. Erica, I had a question around kind of that mantra of like when you're interviewing with these folks, like, are you finding, I guess, that startups are doing better with interviews? Are they starting to like rely less on like whiteboarding?
I think this goes back to what I said about every startup is like super, super different. So like some of that, like a lot of that, I think a lot of that is often determined by the culture that the founders set. So like if you've got founders that come in, like if you've got founders that are like, yeah, just like it depends on how like they're steeped in their like beliefs around evaluating folks. Like some folks are really tied to whiteboard interviews, others aren't. To be honest, if you're interviewing for like a founding engineer role, sometimes like you might not even be getting interviewed by, like, sometimes you might not have a technical person, so you might be getting vetted by like a technical advisor or friends of the company that have a technical skill set, and so it is all over the place. So I don't, I don't know that there are any like super obvious trends there. I do find that I'm less likely to get like leak code questions from startups because luckily most of them view that as a waste of their time as well. So
AI has made leak code much less useful because you can just feed the questions into a system which will generate it, which is like doing us all a service, if I'm being honest. Um, Different teams will have different levels of capability, right?
yeah.
And different interest in investing in it. Many startups will have a bunch of people who are in hiring and manager positions because they were really good programmers. And the company was like, you've been here for a while, you put in a bunch of time, we're going to make you more senior. And the way that we think about that is now you're going to be telling other people what to do. Those people have not necessarily learned a dang thing about how to manage people, how to hire, how to interview. They haven't thought about what's going on as a socio-technical system around them. It is a different skill set and different set of knowledge. And some people have it. Some people, like, honestly, they're ICs who have really, really great leadership understanding. They've read a lot of stuff. Especially people who've come from different areas, like non-computing, non-technical areas. Some of those people are gold, by the way, and I really, really love working with them. But lots of hiring managers just have different levels of understanding and ability. Um,
Totally. Chris, I know there were some questions directed at you, so feel free to just start riffing on them. There
yeah,
are some
sure.
more for Eric too, but just Chris, get in there.
Yeah, sure. Kate, do you feel I answered your question in the chat about tech stacks?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the big thing is, right, like the very imposter syndrome feeling, right? Where you're
I
like, oh,
get it.
I've done like this programming language and this stack for, 5 years now. And
Oh yeah.
like a lot of the places I'd like to go to are, doing a completely different stack, doing a completely different programming language. And it's like, yeah, I could do projects and I could spend my time instead of like working on leak code or working on those working on projects to like get those up to talk about them. But like, how much time should I actually focus on that, right? And it's like, I don't know. So I think,
I
yeah,
mean, if you have good reasons for wanting to work at a particular place that has a particular tech stack, then you have a vested interest in learning about that stack. But I would say, what kind of level would you put yourself at, Kate? Are you
I
senior,
would
junior?
say, yeah, I would say like intermediate senior,
Intermediate
right?
senior? Okay. So intermediate senior, you have already learned how to learn things. You are able to think about like what are we actually trying to solve here and like pick a reasonable way forward to go ahead and do that. I would say you should be able to pick up a project and work on it and build something in a foreign stack. It would just take you a bit longer because you'll have to look up every third thing. And that's okay. You can do that. You can also work with AI tools to say like, hey, I'm trying to figure out how to do this in such a language or a stack or whatever. Can you produce something? And it will be wrong, like, some of the time. But that's okay because it'll give you something to look at and then go and learn more and go ahead and build it. And I would say like, yeah, by all means, be able to be functional in it, but do it with like build something out of it. Don't just like go do leak code because that's not the best way to learn things, I think. If on the other hand, you're doing it just because you feel like you need to know more things, like look into why it is you want to do that. Are you just looking to broaden yourself? It's a reasonable thing. Let me tell you, as somebody who's been working on socio-technical systems for a long time, like I actually have not done a ton of coding. I've been working with human beings and their dysfunctions. And it's a completely different thing. It's still interesting. It's still hard. It still takes a lot of my focus and reading and learning and so forth. But right now, as I'm moving away from the role that I've been in at Shortcut and thinking about what's next for me, um, I'm enjoying digging in and working on some technology and actually putting my hands in code again and doing that because I haven't done it in a little while. So like if you can get into that mindset where you're just thinking like this is part of my practice that I'm working on, it can be something that's much lighter. I see a question here from, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying that's great, Chris. Thank you.
Cool, thanks. I see a question from Christina. I mentioned for senior folks, they're talking about a project interview. You want to hear about trade-offs and business impact. What are some of the things you're looking for from senior plus candidates? That's a good question, Christina. The answer from what you've said here is I'm looking for them to guide more of the conversation and be able to talk about the why a little bit more and think a little bit more strategically. So when I talk to you about like, okay, so what has the impact been at the places you've been? I'm looking for you to say, well, first of all, the thing you need to understand is this is the situation that we were in with the company. Here's what we were in it from a financial point of view. This is where we were in the market. These are the things that we're trying to do in a GTM sense. This is kind of the stage of things. This is how mature these teams were around me. Here's what our strengths were. Here's what our weaknesses were. Here were the people that were around me and doing things. You notice I haven't talked about technology at all yet. And this is a long kind of conversation. And then we go into here's how I came into play. Here's the kind of thing that I was doing. Here's the challenges I ran into. There was another question here about how when things went not according to plan. It's one of my favorite questions is like, what is the biggest failure of your career? Um, it's really interesting to see what people talk about when they talk about how things do not go according to plan. In fact, one of the things I've been doing recently is in this executive community that I've been kicking off is we call it Missteps Masterclass, where executives come together in a secret meeting and tell us about times when stuff just did not go well. It's super interesting. We learn a lot from each other's mistakes. But that being said, yeah, when we're talking about things with someone senior, the world is not black and white. The world is not perfect, and we both know that. So let's stop pretending otherwise. Tell me about the challenges. Tell me about what you were doing. Tell me about why the successes happened. Tell me about what was going on after code left your team, right? Like we did this thing, we put it into production. This is how the reception was with the customers. This is what the feedback loop looked like, right? Here's how we were trying to set up to build the technical infrastructure underneath the plan like a year or two out, right? Those are the kinds of things that I'm looking for. And generally speaking, I like to have a set of behaviors that we can look at for like I actually have it open right here in front of me just in case it came up, but like I have um, a, a, a like a skills level chart which says like at this level, these are the behaviors I expect to see. At this level, these are the behaviors I expect to see. And so when people are telling me their stories, I might like look at that and go like, oh yeah, we haven't heard about this one. And I'll try and generate my questions around that.
Brilliant.
I think that a lot of people are
Um,
using those kind of rubrics that you're looking at.
No, I mean, it depends, right? Like,
uh,
yeah,
in
it depends.
Greenhouse, right? They tell you to like score on like grit and like resilience and I don't know. You go. I just
No, no,
everyone
no,
did
no.
this.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Some people get a lot of good advice and follow none of it, and some people get some good advice and follow it, but they don't really know why. And some people I've like been through some stuff, honestly, and have learned a few things about it. Um, some people are looking for excuses to disqualify anybody who isn't exactly like them. Let's be honest, right? Um, and uh, and some people are just are really just trying to understand. And it's going to depend. People are different. I'm sorry I can't give you a more straightforward answer.
All good, Chris. I was just curious what your thoughts were.
Erica, there's a question from Ali about explaining how things did not go according to plan. I think that your experience with like your broad experience working with a lot of early startups might be really interesting here. Do you think you could field that one?
I have not been very good at following the chat here. Who's got the question? Or where's
Ali,
the question?
do you want to voice over that? Oh, there it is.
Oh, there
Hi.
we go.
Yeah, I can talk through it briefly. Basically, just when interviewing, how do you approach explaining either a role or project that didn't go well? I'm thinking about there's been a lot of layoffs recently, so people going through that or challenging management situations.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure. Well,
I have a question off of this question, if that works for you, Erica.
sure.
So I loved what Chris was just saying about some of the failures, and something we talk about in behavioral prep a lot is like that you don't have to put a bow on a failure, or like you don't even have to put a bow on. People go, "Oh, what's a challenge you overcame?" And they bring their story, and it like is too neat, right? It's like too cleanly tied with a bow. And so what I would ask you is like, what sort of stories do you generally respond well with, especially because so many startup stories don't end in a traditional success? Did
Yeah,
that?
I mean, yeah, I think you know, I think this is an interesting one because like I think, from at least when I'm having these kinds of conversations, usually I'm setting a lot of context. Like before I go into that, like as an interviewer, I'm usually setting up a lot of context around it to try and make sure that someone's comfortable digging into this. Because I know we're about to head into a question that people tend to feel uncomfortable about talking. So usually I'm doing a little bit of setting up. And so, but you're not always going to walk into an interview where someone's thinking about that. So, like I'm going to talk about this from just like an interviewing person's perspective, because obviously I answer this question. It's a little bit, I think I'm finding it a little challenging to speak about it like from an interviewer's perspective, because usually like, I've treated this question as like as an interview, I've generally treated these questions of like, let's get into something meaty because we've got a short amount of time here in interview process. We're a startup, so we're going to get into some meaty things. So I have to very quickly get into a meaty topic and understand what it's like to work with you in a challenging situation. And that's how we treat the conversation. And so I try to set up an environment where someone is a little more comfortable opening up because they don't feel like, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
like, I guess like approaching the conversation, I think it's just a matter about like, to some degree, you have to try to practice getting comfortable talking about hard topics like that, because at the end of the day, like, you're like the whole purpose of this, and again this is like for yourself as well, like you're trying to understand what it's going to be like to work with these people. Like you've got a limited amount of time to get a lot of information because you're about to spend a lot of hours with these folks. And so like when you're going into this, like you just want to be kind of candid. Like you're gonna, not everything's gonna come out perfectly, and that's the whole point of this. So you're just gonna have to like get a little bit of practice like diving into some of these as if you're like talking with that close coworker, even though this may be the first time you're meeting that person. And that's really tough. Like it's not easy, but that's kind of how I approach it when I'm interviewing, is like, all right, like I just kind of gotta lay some cards out at the table and show that I understand the environment, the context, my role in this like thing, and where like own the things that were my bad, but also putting that in the context of the broader environment so that the person I'm talking with understands that like I like that I've like thought about this scenario in a deep and meaningful way. But I don't know that you're ever going to shake off the
No,
awkward.
I think you're making some good points. The issue that a lot of folks have is they're not the question isn't as well phrased as you do it. They say, tell me about something hard, and then people don't say a hard enough thing, and then they get rejected for not picking a hard enough problem. So I think your advice is good. It's like you have to make it meaty and kind of vulnerable, or it
Yeah,
doesn't
because like if you don't give
pass.
something, I mean, this is something where you're gonna
Yeah.
have to give. You're gonna have to like you're gonna have to be a little bit vulnerable. And like I know you're already vulnerable because you're interviewing, so you're kind of naturally in a vulnerable state. But in particular, that scenario, you're gonna have to give a little something because you need to give a little bit of a hook for someone to be able to dig into the conversation. Otherwise, what you're gonna like if you're lucky and you have a good interviewer, they will like guide you to get to that meaty thing, because like that happens to me all the time as an interview. I'll set that up and someone gives me something really like kind of shallow and I'm like, okay, like I'll try to like kind of weave them in, but if not, like I'm gonna ask it again until we get to something
Right.
meaningful. So some of it will depend on your interviewer and whether or not they can like guide you into that kind of conversation to get what they're looking for.
Totally.
But
We
that's
like
not
are
your.
running out of time already, which is amazing. Chris, you've been like very handling the chat very well. Do you see any little like nuggets that you think are worth bringing to discussion? We also have the whole chat. We save it after, and we'll just make sure that questions get answered if we want to answer them async, or we can add the two of you into our community channel for a little bit to just thread out any answers. But Erica, were you going to say something?
Oh yeah, no, if like I know since we're running out of
If you
time, I'm
want,
definitely.
we'll add you both in just for like a little bit to answer questions. But Chris, did you see anything that you thought was worth sort of pulling out of the chat and into the
There was
light?
there was one thing that I think is actually relevant to the previous conversation. And Ryan was asking about like how can you get feedback from an interview process? And the thing that I was basically leaning on was I found it's usually best. In fact, this is a general rule of mine to try to talk about the past or the future separately. Having a conversation where you talk about what happened in the past and what's going to happen in the future at the same time, like has probably happened in a lot of our performance reviews, is actually really painful and hard because people often cross the streams in ways that don't work. So rather than if you're trying to get feedback at your current job from interview sessions, the most likely way that I've found to do it is to talk about like, hey, regardless of what has happened in the past, I'm looking to figure out what's happened in the future. Um, I will want to become better. So what are the gaps that you see that would help me in the future is what I would suggest. And you might learn some really interesting things from that. Um, but yeah, that's that's what
Rian,
I
I
had to
don't know if
say.
we
And
missed something. Let's DM after this. I didn't see what happened there. Okay, got it. Any other questions that um we should cover? I think we should probably grab all of this. Jem, do you have the whole chat? Cool. I didn't, yeah, okay, we'll talk offline. If everyone just wants to share, say thanks so much for our speakers today.
Thank
I think you said
you.
Rian. I think it's just Rian. Okay. Yeah, Crystal, we do this panel every month, but this was like amazing. I think this was honestly our best one yet. Don't tell Robbie. Robbie's gonna be dethroned, but I think Robbie does a lot of amazing stuff in our community. But I thought this panel had so many good, juicy parts. It's always nice to just like write one sentence or one thing you learned if you're still here, what like just so our panelists know and feel the love. And then we'll just make sure we connect you all in the chat and uh yeah, just write a sentence, something you learned, and then we'll hop off. Love it, love it, love it. Yes, yes. Yes. Wonderful. Wow, cool. Yeah. Oh yeah. I know, Kate, you have to be elegant with that one. Chris it's so good, but you have to be delicate.
super right.
Yeah. Um, okay, awesome. I'm so glad there were so many good takeaways. Thank you so much. All right, bye everyone. We'll share the recording as well. Bye, you guys. Thank
Bye.
you.
Have a good rest of your day.